I'm Professor Kerry Howell. I'm a deep sea ecologist, and my research focuses on understanding the distribution of species and habitats in the deep sea.
My name is Louise Firth. I'm a marine ecologist. I work in shallow systems, but I also work in the marine built environment. So this is developed areas developed by humans. And my research focuses on how we can make space for nature in the marine built environment.
I think the greatest threats in the deep sea environment are associated with fishing mainly, but increasingly a new industry coming around is deep sea mining, which is another potential threat. And then ultimately climate change, which is threatening all habitats and species, whether marine or terrestrial. In terms of opportunities, I think the deep sea is vast, and it is an area we are increasingly looking to use as the human population expands. And so there is opportunity to use it sustainably. But it's having the information to enable us to do that and to make the right decisions and to understand what we're trading off. When we say we're going to fish an area, what is it that we're trading that off against? It may be mitigating climate change or other types of ecosystem functions that are going on.
I think probably the number one threat for me would be coastal development, building cities, building artificial islands, and the detriment to marine ecosystems. When we're developing coastal environments, in the past we used to just develop them with humans in mind. Today we're now recognising that we can't continue like that. We have to think about nature. Humans have been referred to as the ultimate ecosystem engineer. Now, with everything that we're learning about our impacts on the environment, we're turning that ecosystem engineer into ecological engineering. So actually designing ecosystems to actually give back to nature rather than just taking. It's never going to be as good as the original natural habitat, but we have to think big, we have to think innovatively, and we have to work with people beyond engineering expertise and ecology to think about novel ways of making space for nature. There's lots of ways that you can do it. Marine life will rarely settle onto a concrete seawall. They need roughness at a range of different scales. So by creating roughness at a sub-millimetre scale, manipulating the materials, there's all sorts of eco-concretes that are being designed. There's some wonderful work being carried out globally at the moment.
I think that's absolutely right. Nature is at the heart of our ability to exist on this planet, and it's not something that we should think about secondarily as, oh, we better also take care of nature. It's right at the heart of everything that we do. We have to make sure that those ecological systems are protected and functioning and able to do all the things they do for us without us even thinking about it, producing oxygen, storing carbon, producing food, all those important things that we rely on. So we want to be able to use the marine environment, but make sure those things are still working. And that's what it's really about, isn't it? It's understanding what does the natural environment do for us, and then how, when we use that marine environment, can we make sure we're not messing that up in any way?
We're already putting huge pressure on land, and people are now beginning to look to the sea, not just in coastal environments, but actually building whole artificial islands to actually cater for housing people in places where they're running out of space. So in the shorter term, certainly with population increase, I think it's inevitable that destructive activities are going to impact in coastal and nearshore environments for sure. But beyond the science, we need to be working with local communities, and we need to be working with conservation agencies to ensure that these potentially harmful practices aren't actually used to facilitate the development, get other people's opinions and make sure there's a process in place to prevent that happening.
Marine protected areas are a really important tool in our management of the ocean. So the idea behind marine protected areas is that if you keep a piece of the system safe and working well, it acts as an insurance policy for areas of the ocean that you're using and potentially damaging. So they're a really important tool. They're only one tool in a toolbox, but they have this really great role of protecting that ecosystem function, and that's the important thing. You protect the habitats and the species. They can continue interacting, working in the ways that they normally do, going about their business and producing those services that we rely on, like nutrient recycling and carbon sequestration. So they are important and we need more of them. But the problem with the deep sea, or the challenge that we have, is that we know much less about it. So we know it's important, we know it does things for us, we know the things that happen in the coastal environment are also linked to things that happen in the deep sea. There is a connectivity there. but we don't understand those linkages terribly well, and we certainly don't understand the nature of the services and the quantities involved to the point where we can make informed decisions about management. So there's definitely work to do to map the role of people and human society in the deep sea. You know, what is it that we personally, I get from the deep sea environment? You know, why should I care? So I think we've got work to do in really communicating to the public and to governments.
The whole world is connected. Land is connected to sea, freshwater systems are connected to the sea. Anything that happens in a coastal setting, so whether it's up on Dartmoor, for instance, or whether it's in the city of Plymouth, has the potential to actually end up in the sea. And this is things like nutrients, it's things like soils, it's things like debris, plastic for instance. Often things do end up in the sea. And there is scope in certain circumstances that they will eventually end up in the deep sea. So there is certainly connectivity from land to sea.
Yeah, most certainly. We see things like terrestrial litter. You know, we've been to places in the deep sea that no human has ever been to before, and yet we'll find litter there. And it's come from coastal environments. It'll travel down canyon systems and get moved into the deep sea environment. You know, they're connected, and so it is important that we do understand whole systems, not just individual pieces of systems. And I think that speaks to, you know, where our work links, and also the need for collaboration between scientists in different disciplines, that sort of interdisciplinary working, because it takes that to understand a whole system. I think we are now at the perfect time. We are at the start of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. It is also the decade of restoration, and we've got this 10-year period to really turn things around, and I think we can turn things around. The human race is incredibly innovative and is capable of such wonderful things, and we know what the problems are. We just need to put our mind to solving them, and I do think we can do that.
Kerry was saying that it's the decade of ocean science, it's the decade of restoration, but it's also the decade of sustainable development. So all of this is completely relevant for, you know, how we build urban environments both now today and into the future. What's happened in the coastal environment is potentially where the deep sea might be going, and you can learn a lot from what we learned from coastal environments.
I think we're often lacking data, so we've had to adopt techniques like statistical modelling, which helps us fill data gaps. And so I think those kinds of approaches, they work in shallow water as well, but the shallow water environment haven't necessarily used them as much because they've been able to collect data more readily than we have. So I think that filling data gaps that we do in the deep sea can definitely translate to the shallow water environment. But I think there's a lot. You guys are ahead of us, aren't you, in terms of development and people's use of the environment, and so you're, you know, trying to solve problems right at the coal face because they've already happened. In many ways you're looking at restoration, so I think we've got, you know, we're looking at you kind of going, oh, okay, that's where we're headed, so we need to think about what you're doing and make sure we can do it as well. You
have the benefit of time, I think, in the deep sea, to not just restore environments, but actually to reserve and preserve. I mean, we often talk in my field about restoration and rehabilitation. I would argue it's first of all reservation, then restoration. Rehabilitation is when you're dealing with sort of more, you know, damaged environments, and then reconciliation in an urban environment. So, but you have time to actually reserve and look after environments before the damage is done in many ways. Which is hopeful, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly where we are, and I hope that we can learn from what's happened in shallow water and coastal environments in particular, and not make the same mistakes again in the deep sea. And so in the deep sea, I hope we can make sure we don't follow that exact same path and get it right the first time, and make sure we are reserving and preserving, as opposed to you know, then being in a situation where we have to just look at mitigating and restoring, which is not really where you want to be.
So I think, yeah, bottom line, don't lose hope. We have to look to the future with hope that we can reverse some of the negative impacts, but then prevent future impacts for sure.